June is a month of a lot of things. Men's mental health awareness, Father's Day, but most corporations, they don't really care about either of those. And instead, they usually funnel all their resources to Pride-related content because that's what they think really matters. You may have noticed that Pride this year has been a little muted compared to last year, which is unsurprisingly done on purpose, due to how pretty much everyone rejected Pride Month last year. And as you all likely know, Runescape and old school Runescape have also been staples of the MMO world since 2001. I remember playing Runescape myself back in grade 7, because it could run on my parents' computer and even run on the school's computers too. I would log in, I would fish for lobsters, and then I would sell them. I even still remember when one guy tricked me and stole all of my armor, saying that he could trim it, and then he never gave it back to me. Dude, I was devastated. I think that's actually where my trust issues began. If that guy is watching this, by the way, I hope you hit your shin on something metal, because you ruined my day back then. Anyways, like I said, RuneScape is like digital comfort food for many because it's really grindy, it's full of nostalgia, and it's full of players who've been chopping down like virtual trees since dial-up was a thing. Remember dial-up internet? God, I'm old. And for years, Jagex, which owns and makes RuneScape, has leaned very, very hard into Pride Month specifically, with events like Tales of Pride and in-game marches where players rocked rainbow capes and like it was like a whole medieval pride parade for the entire month pretty much. To say that RuneScape was taken over by this ideology, that would be an understatement. The entire game just became a digital playground for these types of players. Some would even say it's been a safe space for LGBTQ+ gamers specifically. However, RuneScape hasn't been doing well for a really long time. As this Gamer Blurb article details, RuneScape has lost well over half its players over the years, and that's not by accident. According to them, since OSRS released in 2013, which stands for Old School RuneScape by the way, the current modern RuneScape that people call RuneScape 3 has been on a downward trend because nobody really cares about new RuneScape. And since Old School came back, modern RuneScape actually lost about 57% of their players, and have never really recovered since then. So RuneScape has had all kinds of problems over the years. They removed free trading, which was overwhelmingly met with negative reception, and then fans rallied to get it back in the game. They also added more modern gameplay enhancements to make RuneScape play more like World of Warcraft and such too. The game that you're seeing on screen right now is actually RuneScape Dragon Wilds, which is a co-op survival spin-off, if you will, of RuneScape. So, the brand is kind of evolving and devolving all over the place. And people really just want RuneScape to be like it was well over a decade ago and then some. Actually, a good comparison is Dragon Quest. You know how fans of Dragon Quest want the games to stay old school no matter what? Well, RuneScape fans are pretty much the same. But like I said, they lost a lot of players due to all kinds of moronic decisions, and also there was this big push for LGBT+ content that was also not really helping anything and causing even more people to leave because the game no longer really felt like a fantasy world. It was just turning into a medieval digital version of like Portland or San Francisco with all the flags and stuff. So eventually the old CEO would leave, which is this guy on screen that you're seeing, and then he would hand the reins over to this much younger guy here that you're seeing whose name is John Bellamy. He's Jagex's new CEO, who rolled into the position in around March 2025. Then, with April this year, this new CEO guy posted on Jagex's internal message board that there will be no more new Pride content for 2025, and people lost their minds. He instead wanted to focus the game and Jagex on what players want and protect the company from those who would wish us harm. The translation is that he's scared of the anti-woke players who have completely decimated video games in 2023 and especially in 2024. So as you would expect, people were really pissed, and then Pink News had this article which stated that the new CEO was catering to American conservatism by not allowing new LGBT+ Pride content to be added to the game in June no less. So this Pink News article, as seen here, spoke to an anonymous employee who works on RuneScape. Although, as seen here in that same article, many employees working on the game have actually been pushing back. And they even leaked to places like Pink News that the new Pride-aligned content was actually already finished and ready to be implemented into the game, but the CEO's final approval was stopping it. And so the backlash reached a point internally that staff members were offering to finish the game themselves and implement these Pride content things on their own time, meaning that Jagex wouldn't even have to pay them for their work on the game to do this. So they were so hell-bent on ensuring that the Pride content was available during Pride Month that they were stopping at literally nothing to implement it. Apparently, this is also the first time that this has ever happened, since last year the Pride story was players having to help a character named Rain, who would have to form like a Pride parade to be conducted in RuneScape's virtual world. Here's even a photo from 2023 showing how the game had full-blown transgender flags and more implemented into the game even then. According to Pink News, who spoke to these devs anonymously, many of them believe the reason why Pride 2025 was abandoned by Jagex's new CEO was because of Trump's anti-DEI laws that effectively removed and gutted many of the institutions that relied on government funding to exist in the first place. Because most of these movements, to the surprise of nobody, were generating little to no money or engagement organically. Instead, they needed funding constantly to exist, which just basically tells you that these things weren't being accepted or could really stand on their own 2 feet without a lot of help. Anyway, a reminder back in February 2025 as well, Trump's administration did tear US aid apart, and it was publicly stated that many of the institutions pushing that sort of content were being funded by American taxpayer money without Americans even knowing that their money was actually doing that. So yes, it was all a big issue. I covered this before already, but it proved that the LGBT explosion of content and initiatives were not being done organically. They were, like I and many others called out, they were in fact actual real-life propaganda that was being forced into everything. So while Jagex is not an American company, they're UK-based in case you didn't know, their investors, however, are actually American-based instead. Specifically, one investment group that kind of oversees them is called CVC Capital Partners, which is a private equity firm in Jersey. And they fund a large portion of RuneScape's operations and then some. So John Bellamy, that's the CEO of Jagex and RuneScape, he got so much backlash internally from employees that he had to have a Q&A with his workers to explain why he made this decision for the company. He said, as it reads here, Friday's communications very clearly caused distress. I want to be clear, the decision for this is with me. I own it, I'm fully responsible for it. I published Friday's announcement with speed in mind, and this weekend's messages and questions made that clear. I understand that RuneScape is precious because it is a safe space. It is an escape from reality, and the reality we find ourselves in is changing. It is getting stranger, more troubling, less moral, I would argue. Games and studios are being canceled because of content that is perceived to be woke or representative. The pendulum is swinging back in a way we didn't expect. John's reasoning for this, as he says here, is to ensure the business is protected against those that would wish us harm. This is the difficult balance that Friday's decision was trying to find. The way that I communicated it missed the mark. While he did confirm that Pride parades are still allowed to happen in RuneScape despite this, he did feel a moral responsibility to protect the game's integrity, and he would say more, which is, the content is now controversial in a way it didn't used to be, and that controversy now brings more risk than it did previously. Risk that I'm personally responsible to protect against. So what John Bellamy is saying is that he can read between the lines. And he knows that if RuneScape continues down this path of pushing pro-LGBT content for the rest of time pretty much, they will, as in Jagex, fall apart and be completely destroyed by lack of players, money, and much more. As again, like the USA thing confirmed, most of this growth of these initiatives that were pro-LGBT were not organic, and were in fact propaganda that was disguised as empowerment. I think we should also come to the realization that this is a big reason why RuneScape, for example, has lost many of its players. Because it has no longer become a place for escapism when you can really no longer escape the real world in that game anymore. RuneScape, like others, has over time become less a medieval fantasy world devoid of our real-world politics, and has instead become a sanitized playground to push and indulge in pro-DEI and LGBT stuff instead. It's sort of like how Dungeons & Dragons and many more are right now too. None of these spaces, they feel like escapism anymore. They've all instead just become extensions of real-world politics and beliefs, which in my opinion, kind of completely defeats the purpose of what these games are meant for, which is escapism, honestly, and not propaganda. However, now we gotta talk about the RuneScape community because they did not take this lying down at all. These are also the same people who recreated the Boston Tea Party in-game when Jagex hiked membership prices, which no, I'm not kidding, that actually happened. Look at this. Like seriously, American RuneScape players actually did that. I'm not lying. So when word got out about the CEO's decision, the internet kind of erupted in response. On Reddit, players coined the new phrase going around RuneScape, which was no gay, no pay. And they were flipping a homophobic slogan from 2017's Pride controversy into a protest badge instead. As seen here from PC Gamer, no gay, no pay, the RuneScape community is absolutely mauling Jagex's new CEO over his decision to cancel new Pride Month events. As one former RuneScape dev said, as seen here, this makes me really angry, cowardly, and disgusting. There's more too. Another user blasted the CEO on Twitter saying, "Excuse me, Jagex, but what the hell is this, you absolute cowards? You dial back Pride content because you're scared of mean tweets from alt-right losers online, all while pretending to still be an ally. No one's falling for this." The comments in response were, well, hostile to say the least. One user would say back, "No one gives an F about your sex life, keep it in the bedroom, you bundle of sticks." Another user would clap back also by saying, "It's 2025, Jagex does not have the spare cash to burn on catering to mentally ill men in dresses." And another user would say, "We are so back, thank you Trump." Yeah, you get the point. Pretty much, there's a very, very vocal group within RuneScape that is pro-LGBT and Pride that is looking to cancel all their subscriptions to the game and pretty much is downright boycott it. But what those players are probably going to learn the hard way is that while they may be very vocal, they are, whether they like to admit it or not, still a minority of the general RuneScape population. And that clearly this CEO wouldn't have made the decisions that he did unless he had real tangible data and info given to him by the people who obviously analyze RuneScape's players, profits, and more on an internal level. The truth is this, okay? If this group of LGBT pro players were really as big as they claim to be, this CEO would never have said any of this because it would have been financial you-know-what if he did that. However, if you ask me, the fact that he did say this proves that he knows internally that there are frankly not enough of these kinds of players to sufficiently support and keep RuneScape alive on their beliefs or their subscriptions alone. And that the overwhelmingly majority of RuneScape players are in fact not pro-LGBT players. I would wager most of them actually avoid that sort of content too because it just doesn't interest them. Doesn't mean that they're bigots, they just don't want any part of that, and that's totally fine. But I think throwing around threats like this, it just kind of proves that not only is your group very vocal, but honestly, you're kind of disruptive too. Because companies do not just suddenly make decisions like this if the alternative would have been financial devastation for them. Jagex knows that while they may lose a majority of these LGBT pro players, that in the long run, their exodus from the game is probably not going to have much of an effect at all, pretty much, on Jagex's finances or anything like that. Reputation, okay, yeah, sure, because as we know, many people in the industry are obviously pro-LGBT, but however, if you ask me, I would wager that many of them are going to be pro-whatever, honestly, that keeps them employed. Because if there's anything I've seen and learned about game companies and such when it comes to covering them in these godforsaken videos, it's that actually the vast majority of these companies, they have no morals of their own. They just simply do whatever it is that will get that internet clout or, the virtual backpats from other developers. But clearly, like this RuneScape CEO is seeing, this push isn't making anything substantial happen for the game. Because he learned in real time that catering to a mob of small but very vocal players does not actually equal profits. And he also knows that in the long run, this will be good for the game, and even if you do disagree with it, you kinda know that it's true. Again, it's not like he's banning Pride or LGBT stuff in the game forever. Pride parades can still happen in-game. The flags and whatever else that already exists in the game are not being removed. The point is that this pivot is needed to ensure that RuneScape and Jagex as a company survives the future. But these types would rather RuneScape become an actual ghost town than come to terms with reality. However, this hasn't stopped the employees and the DEI position ones to, push back. They wrote in an open letter, again, this is from Pink News, which says, "Dear Jagex executive team, we are writing to ask you to restart development on the new Pride content for 2025, and to make a commitment that Pride will continue to be an annual seasonal event in both Old School and RuneScape. We are all aware of the difficult political climate in gaming and the wider world. We understand that openly presenting ourselves as a diverse and inclusive company could be seen as a risk. However, as outlined below, the data from previous Pride events as well as the pronoun changes in Old School clearly shows that despite a vocal minority engaging in bigoted behavior online, this did not translate to a loss of revenue. We are writing to you because we believe in Jagex, we believe in our players, and we believe that not giving into hate is the right decision for the business in the long term. So, according to the pro-LGBT devs at Jagex, these changes did not affect revenue. Although, clearly, Jagex's CEO would have more info on this himself. And if the upper management at Jagex would email back also to this open letter, and here's what they said. As a studio, we must stay grounded in the mission we all share, and that's making great games for players. Our job is not to use the game as an outlet for our own views, but to craft worlds that serve our players, offering immersion, escape, and meaning. That responsibility asks each of us to apply good judgment and to make creative decisions that resonate across a wide and diverse community. And that's what we've tried to do here. So, I think what the management has said here makes sense. Look, I can see where those, pro-LGBT people are coming from, claiming that this content, in their opinion, is not divisive. Again, remind you, they lost like 50% of their players already, so maybe what they're saying isn't 100% true. But what the CEO and his team are saying, and they have obviously clear evidence in front of them, I mean, they can look at it from all these changes, and they have come to the conclusion that these things are not helping RuneScape in the long run, and there's no other reason why they would really make this decision. Because they would know 100% that by doing this, that they'll get crucified by their own devs and the journalists and whatnot. They knew that would happen. They're not stupid. However, it's clearly worth it in the long run, in their opinion, for them to push this if it means a healthier and honestly less politically charged future for them. I think what RuneScape has done here is tough, sure, but it's kind of necessary because games should be escapism from everything. And that's not just, the LGBT stuff. I mean everything. Conservative values and flags or LGBT ones, anything real, it shouldn't be there. Because RuneScape, which these people hate to admit, it's not real life. It is not Portland or Atlanta or San Francisco, guys. It's RuneScape. It's why so many people hate it when these fantasy worlds suddenly cater to real life modern day lingo, because yeah, it takes you out. And if I were to turn RuneScape on right now and just be bombarded with like trans flags and more, that would just tell me that this game's community and its developers are unable to distinguish reality from that of the virtual world. And actually shows that they cannot, under any circumstances, be willing to set aside their clear agenda if it means making their games less political. And that they have to feel validated and approved by everyone, and if they aren't, it's suddenly a hate crime, which it isn't. And frankly, what a lot of these types are proving is that they are acting like children, whether they want to admit it or not. These concepts do divide people, and when your game survives based on its community and its subscriptions, it's always better to not alienate or divide potential paying customers no matter what you do. Look, okay, this isn't just about RuneScape, it's part of a broader trend too. Companies like even Target are scaling back their Pride merch as well. And other game devs are also dodging the whole woke content because it's nuclear, guys, come on. However, from what I've seen online, players are pointing out the hypocrisy saying that RuneScape has Easter bunnies and Santa Claus, but a Pride event is too political. However, these people are actually telling on themselves. You see, Santa Claus is not a political statement, plus his existence comes from the basis of St. Nicholas, a Christian figure. Therefore, Santa is by definition based on Christianity as a religion. Sure, Santa is maybe more secular now, but the point still stands. Easter is tied to Jesus as well, which fills that same point, and being gay or being pro-LGBT is not a good comparison. Unless, and again, this is where I think these players are telling on themselves here, which is that they are insinuating that Pride Month and by extension their rainbow flags are actually a form of their own modern religion that is like Christianity. And that them comparing these flags and beliefs to say Santa or the Easter Bunny, that proves that being gay is not a religion and nor is supporting Pride Month. I'm sorry, but your sexuality is not equivalent to the religious state of another person. However, in these people's minds, their sexuality and their devotion to things like this have become so intrinsically tied to their own identity both in real life and online, that they are unable to differ between these two states any longer, and therefore they are as seen as the same thing. So no, they shouldn't cancel Christmas in any game, or Easter even, because they are not the same thing or even remotely the same. Ultimately, these activists can attack Jagex's CEO all they want, but the reality is that their protest will likely just fall on deaf ears. However, I don't think RuneScape is saved or anything like that either. If I had to guess, these players and devs will voice their opinions and try to strongarm whoever they can to hopefully force this CEO out of his position in the future before long. Now, if RuneScape shares get affected, that could tell a different story. But when I look at the CVC Partners, which owns a big part of Jagex, their shares have actually gone up. So, I mean, it's still too early to tell if RuneScape will get cooked in the long run, but right now, the only real negatives so far are the people who treat their sexuality like their religion that are getting offended by this. Well, look, I'll keep my ear to RuneScape just to see what's going on there, but as you can see, this looks to be on paper anyways a positive change for the game. Whether it stays this way, time will only tell, but what do you think about all of this? Is it a good thing that RuneScape has decided to not release new Pride content, or is that a bad thing? Also, what do you think about the comparison of the Pride flags and such to Christmas and Easter? Is that a valid comparison or not? Let me know in the comments. Thanks as always for being here, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.